Why was she still awake when the others had long since gone silent? The hum of the barracks heater was soft, but it couldn't drown out the sound of her own heartbeat. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots unlaced, uniform still creased from a day that felt endless. Outside, the wind rolled over the Afghan hills, rattling loose sheets of corrugated metal on the maintenance sheds. Every gust sounded like a distant threat. Captain Elena Varela pressed her palms together, fingers trembling ever so slightly. She told herself it was the cold, but it wasn't the cold. It was the memory, the one she'd buried so deep she thought it could never claw its way back. The photograph lay hidden in her breast pocket, a boy's face, no older than 12, sunburned cheeks and defiant eyes. She hadn't shown it to anyone, not even her closest teammate, Staff Sergeant Cole, who'd once told her that trust meant exposure. She didn't believe that anymore. A creak in the floorboards outside, heavy boots. She tucked the photo away, shoulders stiffening. Cole's voice came low, almost hesitant. "Can't sleep either." She shook her head without turning, just thinking. About tomorrow's op. She didn't answer. The mission briefing had been brutal, intel vague, enemy positions uncertain, and the weather promising dust storms that could swallow helicopters whole. But that wasn't what gnawed at her. There was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Cole sat across from her on an empty bunk, elbows on his knees. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed, flickered, then steadied. He looked like he was about to say something but stopped himself. That was Cole, tough exterior, but his silences always felt deliberate, like he knew words could wound. Elena finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "Ever wonder if we're not the heroes we think we are?" His brow furrowed, but he didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her with some soldier's cliché about good guys and bad guys. Instead, he sighed. "Every damn day." The heater clicked off, and the sudden quiet felt heavier than gunfire. She closed her eyes for a moment. Behind her eyelids, flashes of another horizon, smoke curling over rooftops, a child's cry echoing through rubble, the smell of burned rubber and dust, pulled her back to a day she'd tried to erase. The boy in the photo had been there. He'd watched her squad sweep his village. He'd watched her make a choice she wasn't proud of. Tomorrow's mission wasn't just another op. Somewhere out there, someone had set a trap, and the whispers in the intel feed kept circling back to a name she'd once heard in that same village. The desert outside stretched like an endless ocean under the moonlight. She once loved deserts, how the stars spilled without restraint, how the air tasted clean after sunset. But tonight, even the stars felt watchful. A distant whine, a black hawk lifting off for a night patrol, slid through the stillness. Its rotors thumped against the sky like a restless heart. She let herself breathe, slow and careful. Morning came harsh and early. The base smelled of diesel and instant coffee. Soldiers moved with the same practiced efficiency, but under it all was that tension, the unspoken knowledge that today could be the day something went wrong. At the briefing table, Major Kearns pointed at satellite images projected on the screen. "Intel confirms enemy movement through Corval Canyon. They've been using this pass to funnel supplies. We're going to intercept." A murmur swept through the room. Corval was a death trap, narrow ridges, unpredictable wind. A single ambush there could pin a squad down for hours. Kearns continued. "Varela, your point on Overwatch, best eyes we've got." She nodded, but inside her stomach twisted. Cole shot her a look, a small, steadying gesture. The rest of the day unfolded in preparation, gear checks, weapon calibrations, the soft clatter of magazines sliding home. Elena ran her fingers over the worn stock of her M110 sniper rifle. Each scratch was a memory. Each scuff carried a story. By noon, the sun was merciless, bleaching the hills to bone. The air shimmered above the tarmac as their convoy loaded. A radio crackled nearby, half static laughter, half nervous energy. Private Lynn, the youngest on the team, fumbled with his straps. Elena crouched beside him, adjusting the buckles without a word. His hands were shaking. "You'll be fine," she said, voice low, almost maternal. He swallowed hard. "You really think so?" She met his eyes, saw the fear raw and human, and forced a small, tight smile. "I know so." But inside, doubt gnawed. The convoy rolled out, engines growling against the sand. Dust plumed behind them like smoke trails. Elena sat in the back of the lead Humvee, scanning the horizon through her scope even as the landscape blurred past. The canyon loomed ahead, jagged cliffs casting sharp shadows over the winding path. Hours stretched. The radio remained quiet except for occasional check-ins. The monotony was deceptive, the kind of calm that made your skin itch. Then a flicker of movement on a distant ridge, just for a second. She stiffened, brought the scope up, nothing but rock and heat haze. Cole's voice came through her earpiece. "You see something?" "Maybe." He didn't press her. He trusted her eyes more than he trusted the intel. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in bruised oranges and reds, they reached the choke point. Elena climbed out, boots crunching on gravel, and scrambled up a nearby outcrop to set her overwatch. The air was cooling fast, the wind whispering along the cliffs. From her perch the world looked both beautiful and cruel. The canyon below a maze of shadows, the mountains beyond fading into twilight. She adjusted her rifle, her cheek against the cold metal. Her gaze swept the ridges again, still nothing. But the unease didn't leave. Down below, Lynn adjusted his helmet, his nervous glances betraying him. Sergeant Davis cracked a joke to cut the tension, but his laugh was too quick, too forced. Even Cole, steady as stone, kept glancing at the sky like he expected it to fall. Elena's mind drifted, just for a moment, back to the boy in the photo. His eyes, unblinking. His silence that day had been louder than any scream. A glint caught her eye. West Ridge, high up, too sharp, too precise to be natural. She froze. Breath held. Then the crack of a rifle echoed across the canyon. Screams followed. Gravel sprayed as a bullet shattered rock near her position. She ducked, scanning frantically. Over comms, voices shouted, overlapping, "Contact, contact! They're above us." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She located the shooter, a flash of muzzle flare in a rocky crevice. Calculating angles in a split second, she exhaled slow, steady, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing like thunder. Silence, then chaos. More muzzle flashes erupted on the opposite ridge. They weren't alone. Elena shifted, adrenaline burning through her veins. Her breath fogged in the cooling air as night began to swallow the canyon. "Cole, they're flanking," she barked into comms. "Copy that." His voice was tight, strained. Rounds ricocheted off stone around her. The team below scrambled for cover, dust rising in frantic plumes. For a heartbeat she hesitated, her eyes flicking to the west ridge again. The glint was gone. But she felt it. Someone out there wasn't just shooting. Someone was watching her. The same way that boy had, all those years ago. A shiver slid down her spine, colder than the night air. She steadied herself, chambered another round, and whispered under her breath, not a prayer but a promise. "This time I don't miss." Who had fired first, and why did it feel like more than an ambush? The canyon was alive with echoes. Gunfire ricocheted between the ridges like trapped lightning. Dust clouds spiraled in the dimming light, blurring shapes, turning friends and foes into shadows. Elena steadied her breath, cheek pressed to the stock, eyes sweeping the ridgeline for the next flicker of movement. Below, Lynn was pinned behind a rock, his helmet tilted awkwardly as if it might slip off entirely. Sergeant Davis cursed between bursts of return fire. Cole's voice cut through the chaos. "Varela, talk to me." "There's more than one team," she said. "West Ridge and North Face, this isn't random." She fired again. The shot cracked the air and one muzzle flash disappeared, but the others didn't flinch. The wind shifted, carrying with it the dry, metallic scent of blood and spent shells. It hissed along the canyon walls, whispering things only nerves could hear. Cole's Humvee engine roared as he maneuvered it to block a narrow pass. Davis shouted something about a jammed rifle, and still, behind it all, Elena felt that unseen gaze. A quiet voice slipped through her comms, so faint she almost doubted it. It wasn't one of theirs. The words were foreign, clipped, but the tone was familiar. She'd heard it before. Her stomach dropped. Not here, not now. She fired again, suppressing the shiver crawling up her spine. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the gunfire tapered off. Their attackers melted into the cliffs as suddenly as they'd appeared. The canyon fell silent, save for the ringing in their ears and the rasp of labored breathing. Elena climbed down, boots sliding on gravel. Lynn's eyes were wide, too wide as she knelt beside him. A graze on his forearm bled through the fabric. "You're okay," she said, binding it quickly. His voice cracked. They knew where we'd be. She didn't correct him, didn't offer empty reassurance. He was right. Cole joined them, his face drawn tight. "We've been fed bad intel." "Or someone sold us out," Davis muttered, his hands shaking as he reloaded. No one answered. The radio crackled, Kieran's voice on the other end, demanding a status report. Cole responded with clipped efficiency, masking the tension. Elena stayed silent, her gaze drifting back to the ridges. The sky above had gone deep indigo, stars flickering through a haze of dust. On the ride back, the Humvee rattled over rocks, its headlights carving thin tunnels of light through the darkness. The others sat in exhausted silence, but Elena's mind replayed the moment that strange voice cut through her comms. She could almost see the boy again, the one in the photo, only he wasn't a boy anymore. Time would have hardened him, scarred him, turned those defiant eyes into something sharper. Back at base, the air was thick with diesel and tension. Kieran's was waiting, jaw clenched, hands clasped behind his back. He looked each of them over, his gaze lingering on Elena. "We'll debrief in the morning," he said. "Get some rest." Rest, the word felt hollow. Later in the barracks, Elena sat alone again. The photograph burned against her chest like a brand. She took it out, just for a moment, and traced the boy's outline with her thumb. The edges of the photo were worn from years of denial. She remembered the day they'd swept that village. The orders had been clear. Secure the area, clear the buildings, leave no threats. But war didn't fit neatly into orders. A child wasn't supposed to be a threat. Yet his older brother, barely 16, had picked up a rifle. And when the dust settled, only the boy had been left, staring at her with eyes that swore vengeance without a single word. She told herself he'd forget. He hadn't. Cole's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the floor. "You're holding something back." She met his gaze, unflinching. "And you're asking questions you don't want answers to." For a moment neither moved. Then he sighed and stepped inside. "We can't afford secrets, Elena, not now." She looked down at the photo once more, then slipped it back into her pocket. "Some ghosts," she whispered, "don't stay buried." Cole didn't press further. But as he left, she saw something flicker in his expression, a worry deeper than battlefield tactics. Outside, the wind had calmed. The base slept. Somewhere beyond those mountains, a man with the boy's eyes, now hardened, now dangerous, was watching her back. The next day dawned clear, deceptively peaceful. The sun rose over jagged peaks, casting long, golden shadows across the camp. Helicopters idled on the landing pads, their rotors ticking like impatient clocks. At the briefing, Kieran's voice was sharper than before. "The canyon ambush was a test. They were probing our response. We're going to tighten perimeter security and review intel channels." Elena kept her face neutral, but her pulse thudded in her ears. "A test? No, this was personal." Davis spoke up, irritation in his tone. "So we just wait for them to hit again." Kieran shot him a hard look. We wait smart and we prepare. Cole shifted beside her. She could feel his tension, the way he almost wanted to speak but held back. Later, as she cleaned her rifle, the base PA system crackled with a routine weather warning, high winds expected by nightfall. The sky was already hazing over, the promise of another dust storm. Lynn approached hesitant, Captain Varela. She glanced up. He hesitated, then blurted, "Do you think we're doing the right thing here?" The question wasn't tactical, it was moral. She paused, hands stilling on the rifle. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the right thing isn't clear until it's too late." His face fell slightly, but he nodded. Maybe that was the most honest answer she could give. That night sleep didn't come. She stood outside, the wind tugging at her hair, the stars flickering faintly through a veil of sand. The horizon seemed endless, beautiful, but filled with battles no map could show. Somewhere out there, she knew, a set of eyes was watching. Waiting. And she couldn't decide if she was ready to face them. Why did the storm feel like a warning? The desert wind rose before dawn, whispering through the barbed wire fences and loose tarps, carrying the bitter scent of sand and diesel. By mid-morning, the sky had turned a bruised gray, and the sun was just a pale smear fighting against the dust. Elena pulled her scarf higher over her mouth, squinting as she crossed the open yard. The grit stung her eyes, but she hardly noticed. She spent half the night replaying the ambush in her mind, searching for angles she might have missed, tiny details that could have saved her team from walking straight into a trap. In the mess hall, voices were muted, as if even laughter could draw fire. Lynn sat hunched over a tray of untouched eggs, the bandage on his arm stark against his fatigues. Davis stirred his coffee like he was trying to find answers at the bottom of the cup. Cole caught her eye from across the room. His look wasn't the usual steady reassurance, it was a question, a silent one. She looked away first. Major Kieran's voice broke the stillness as he stepped inside. "Listen up. Patrol routes are shifting. We've got chatter that another supply line is compromised. Varela, you and Cole will take overwatch on Ridge 7 today. I want eyes out there before the storm locks us in." Ridge 7 was brutal, high, exposed, and a long trek on foot once the vehicle could go no farther. But she didn't argue. Orders were easier than thinking. The Humvee rattled over uneven ground until the trail vanished into loose shale. They hiked the rest, boots grinding against stone. The wind screamed through the gullies, whipping sand into their faces. Cole trudged ahead, his broad frame cutting a path through the gusts. At the crest, they found a small outcrop with a view of the valley below, a patchwork of barren earth and shadowed gullies. Elena unfolded her bipod, settled the rifle, and peered through the scope. For a while there was nothing, just the wind, just the sound of their breathing. Cole crouched beside her, his voice low. "You've been somewhere else since the ambush." She kept her eye to the glass. "I'm here." "No, you're here." He gestured to the rocks beneath them, "but not here." A pause. "Finally," she said, "there's a man out there, he's watching us. Waiting. This isn't just tactics, it's personal." Cole didn't flinch. "Personal to you." She hesitated, then nodded. The wind gusted harder, rattling her scope. She adjusted it, her fingers steady even as her chest tightened. "You going to tell me why?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. And it was the truth. She wasn't ready to put those memories into words. Below, movement caught her attention. A small group of figures crept along a dry riverbed. Too far to identify, but their pattern was deliberate, spreading out, covering angles. She radioed it in. Kieran's voice crackled back, distorted by static. "Hold position. Don't engage unless you're sure." But her gut told her something was wrong. The storm was rolling in fast, and visibility was dropping by the minute. The first fat grains of sand lashed against her cheeks. The sky darkened to a muted copper. Cole leaned closer. "They'll be gone in 10 minutes if we wait." Elena's pulse quickened. She tracked one of the figures through her scope. The silhouette paused, lifted something to its shoulder. Not a rifle, binoculars. "They're scouting us," she whispered. Then another flicker. A second figure aimed low, not at them, but toward the ridge trail they'd climbed. "A trap." The radio hissed with interference. Kieran's voice was lost. Elena made her choice. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder, swallowed almost instantly by the storm's howl. One figure dropped. The others scattered like startled birds. Cole fired a burst to cover her flank. The storm hit full force, a wall of dust that erased the world. Vision shrank to a few feet. The air was a choking haze. Cole grabbed her arm. "We've got to move." They stumbled down the ridge, half-blind, boots slipping on the shale. The wind howled like an angry god, tearing at their gear. Halfway down, a shadow loomed through the swirling dust. A figure close, too close. Elena swung her rifle up, but the shadow lunged first. The impact drove her back against the rocks, knocking the breath from her lungs. A blade flashed, quick, silent, precise. Instinct took over. She twisted, using the man's own momentum to throw him off balance. The blade scraped stone as it missed her by inches. Cole's rifle barked once, and the attacker crumpled, the wind stealing the sound before it could echo. Elena's hands shook as she pushed herself upright. The man's scarf had fallen back from his face. His features were weathered, older now, but the eyes were the same. The boy's eyes. She staggered backward. Cole caught her elbow, steadying her. "You know him." Cole's voice was barely audible over the storm. She couldn't speak, couldn't force the words past the lump in her throat. The wind roared louder, as if the desert itself wanted to hide the truth. They fought their way back to the Humvee, battered and sand-caked, and began the long, slow crawl toward base. Inside the cab, silence settled, a heavy, suffocating thing. Cole kept glancing at her, but he didn't push. Back at base, the lights through the dust looked like distant stars. The first thing Elena did was retreat to a quiet corner of the motor pool. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She took the photo from her pocket and compared it to the memory burned into her vision, the face on the ridge. Time had carved the boy into a man, but the eyes had never changed. She pressed the photo to her chest, her heart hammering beneath it. The wind outside howled against the walls like an echo of a promise she'd once broken. She thought she'd left the past buried in the sand. But tonight, the desert had given it back. How do you face a ghost when it breathes like a man? The storm battered the base through the night, its winds rattling loose shutters and filling every crevice with fine sand. By morning, the air was thick with dust, a dull amber light filtering through the haze. Elena woke in her bunk, her throat raw from the grit and her dreams jagged with fragments of the boy-turned-man's stare. She dressed quietly, boots slipping on the sand that had gathered on the barracks floor. Lynn was still asleep, his bandaged arm tucked against his chest. Cole's bunk was empty. Somewhere he was probably packing, thinking, piecing together the ambush the way she was. In the mess hall, soldiers murmured over instant coffee, their voices edged with nerves. The storm had delayed comms repairs. Most channels were still down. Cole joined her at a corner table, a tray of untouched food between them. He didn't waste words. It was him, wasn't it? She held his gaze, but her silence answered for her. "Who is he?" Cole pressed. Elena swallowed hard, the photo burned in her pocket. Once he was just a boy. Cole leaned in, voice low. "And now?" "Now," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "he's a man with a reason to hate me." Cole exhaled slowly, the weight of her admission sinking between them. "Does Kieran know?" She shook her head. "You think you should tell him?" She stared at her coffee, swirling the thin black liquid. "Not yet, not until I'm sure." But certainty felt impossible. Later, the storm eased enough for patrols to resume. Kearns called a small group to his office: Elena, Cole, Davis, and Lynn. The major's face was carved from stone. "The canyon ambush wasn't luck," he said. "Whoever's leading them knows our patterns, knows our comms." His gaze flicked to Elena, sharp but unreadable. "We're tightening the perimeter and shifting routes. And Varela, you're leading tonight's recon. Small team, silent." The words dropped like a weight in her stomach. Outside, as they prepped gear, Lynn fumbled with his new comm unit. His hands were steadier today, but his eyes darted nervously. Davis slapped him on the shoulder. "Relax, kid, just another walk in the dark." But the joke fell flat. Even Davis's grin was thin. As the sun bled out behind the mountains, the team slipped into the desert. The world narrowed to the crunch of their boots and the whisper of wind over stone. The sky was a deep velvet, studded with indifferent stars. They reached a low ridge overlooking a dry wadi, a place locals might use to move unseen. Elena scanned through her scope. The valley below was empty, too empty. Cole crouched beside her. "Feels wrong." "Because it is," she said. They waited, the silence stretching until even the sound of their own breathing felt loud. Then a faint glimmer. A single flashlight flicked on and off twice, far out on the valley floor. A signal. Elena stiffened. The pattern was one she hadn't seen in years, one she'd once used herself in that distant village. A trick they'd taught local fighters to communicate without radios. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She whispered, "They're not just using our routes, they're using our old codes." A shape emerged from the darkness below, tall, deliberate, moving without fear. The man stopped halfway across the wadi, just far enough for safety but close enough that moonlight kissed the edge of his scarf. He raised a hand, not in surrender, in recognition. Elena's breath caught. "Stay down," Cole hissed. But she couldn't move. The man's voice carried across the still air, rough, older, but unmistakable. He spoke in accented English. "You remember me." Davis cursed under his breath. Lynn looked to Elena, wide-eyed. She lowered her rifle a fraction. Her voice trembled. "You survived." "You spared me," he said, stepping closer. "And then you left us to the fire." The desert seemed to hold its breath. Memories crashed into her. That day in the village, the chaos, the smoke, the terrible choice. She had spared the boy, but the airstrike that followed had spared nothing else. Cole's whisper was sharp. "Elena, this is a setup." The man continued, his tone not angry but hollow. "You taught us your ways, your codes. Then you left. I buried my brother, my mother, and I waited." Her throat tightened. The rifle felt heavy in her hands. He gestured toward the horizon. "They will keep coming, Captain, not because of orders, because of what you left behind." Another flicker of movement, shapes in the shadows. Too many. Cole's hand closed around her arm. "We're pulling back." She hesitated a second too long. A gunshot split the night. Stone splintered near Lynn's feet. The valley erupted in gunfire. They scrambled back toward the ridge, the night alive with muzzle flashes. Davis laid down covering fire, shouting curses between bursts. Lynn stumbled, a bullet grazing his shoulder. Cole hauled him upright, dragging him toward cover. Elena fired into the dark, but the enemy was everywhere and nowhere, ghosts in the dust. The man with the boy's eyes had vanished into the chaos. By the time they reached safer ground, Lynn was pale and shaking, blood soaking through his sleeve. Cole ripped a field dressing from his kit, pressing it tight. Davis scanned the horizon, breath ragged. The radio crackled faintly, comms partially restored. Kieran's voice came through, distorted but urgent. "Report." Cole answered, keeping his voice steady. "Ambush, multiple contacts, we're pulling back." Elena sat against a rock, chest heaving. Her mind wasn't on the wounds or the firefight. It was on the words, "because of what you left behind." Back at base, the medics took Lynn. Davis disappeared into the showers, silent for once. Cole stayed with her outside the barracks, the cold night pressing in. "You need to tell Kearns," he said quietly. She nodded, but her voice was small. "How do I tell him the ghosts are mine?" Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. The wind did it for him, low and mournful, sweeping over the endless horizon. Elena looked out at the dark ridges beyond the wire. Somewhere out there, a man carried the weight of a village's ashes. Somewhere, he was building something bigger than vengeance. And for the first time, she wondered if her own war wasn't out there at all, but inside. The rain started as a whisper on the metal roof, soft enough to be mistaken for static. Elena sat cross-legged on the floor of the empty safe house, her rifle across her knees, the barrel catching faint light from a single flickering bulb. Outside, the jungle was a blur of shadows, wet leaves glistening like scales. "Why haven't they moved yet?" whispered Sergeant Dyer from the corner. His voice was a thread barely holding. "They're waiting," she replied, though she wasn't sure. Waiting for what? For her mistake, for the moment she'd flinch. Her fingers traced the carved initials on the rifle's stock, her father's old habit, something he'd done to every weapon he'd touched. She had done it too, out of superstition or longing. The tiny letters steadied her now. Through the cracked window, thunder rolled far off. She scanned the tree line again. Somewhere out there, the opposing sniper watched. She could feel it, the weight of another unseen gaze cutting through the rain. She breathed slow in-out. The memory came unbidden, her father teaching her to shoot tin cans off a fence post. "It's not the shot that matters," he'd said, "it's the stillness before it." He had laughed then, light and easy. But that laugh had disappeared with his deployment years ago, and she had joined up not because she loved war, but because she couldn't stand to feel powerless again. "Captain," Dyer's voice trembled, "what if?" "We hold," she cut him off gently. "We wait." A branch snapped somewhere beyond the trees. A shadow moved, too fast to track. Elena's heart thudded, a single hard knock. She didn't fire, not yet. Patience was survival. Minutes stretched, the rain now drumming harder. A trickle of water ran down the window glass, distorting the view. A voice crackled over the con, miles away at base. "Extraction window, moving. You've got 45 minutes to reach the river or you're on your own." She closed her eyes briefly. 45 minutes, too tight. "We're leaving," she said. Dyer cursed under his breath, relief and dread mixed. They slipped into the wet jungle, every leaf brushing against their sleeves like warnings. The ground sucked at their boots. Somewhere behind them, a low thud, the safe house door closing, wind or something else. She didn't look back. As they moved downhill, the world narrowed, rain on her hood, mud underfoot, the smell of wet earth and cordite. Dyer stumbled once, catching himself on a vine. He muttered something about home, his daughter's name, Emma. It was quick, but it broke the tension for a heartbeat. Then a shot, muffled but sharp. A tree trunk splintered inches from Dyer's shoulder. "Down," she hissed, shoving him behind a mossy boulder. Another shot. Bark exploded. The sniper was close now. She felt the old instinct rise, not panic but a hollow calm. "He's tracking us," she whispered, "but not perfectly." Her own rifle came up. Rain slicked the scope. She wiped it once, breath steadying. She scanned branches, leaves, darkness. Then a flicker, a glint on metal far off. She exhaled. The shot was a whisper through the storm. A distant grunt answered it, faint but final. Silence save the rain. Dyer exhaled shakily. "God, you." "Move," she cut him off, though her voice was softer now. "He's not alone." They pressed on, the jungle opening slightly, revealing the river, a swollen, roaring thing, brown with runoff. The extraction point was across it. A motor's low growl reached them, enemy patrol. Two figures appeared on the opposite bank, rifles at the ready. Elena crouched low, motioned to Dyer. Timing mattered now. Another memory slipped in. Her father standing on the porch one stormy evening saying, "Courage isn't loud. It's a quiet choice you make when no one's looking." She waited for thunder. When it cracked, she fired. 2 shots. Two bodies dropped silently into the mud. They splashed into the river, icy water stealing their breath, struggling against the current. Dyer slipped once, and for a heartbeat she saw him swept sideways. Her fingers found his harness, yanking him back. Her shoulders burned, but she didn't let go. They emerged on the far side, soaked and gasping. The extraction boat was a black shape against the rain, engine rumbling low. A crewman waved frantically. But then another shadow on the ridge above, a silhouette, watching, waiting. She didn't fire, not yet. The figure didn't move, didn't aim. Something about the stance was familiar, the way the head tilted slightly. The way her father had stood once on the edge of a training field, proud but sad. The figure stepped back, vanishing into the rain. Dyer swore softly, "Was that?" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter, not now." They climbed aboard, the boat cutting through the swollen river, leaving behind the jungle's secrets. Only when the roar of the motor drowned the rain did she let her shoulders sag. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let anyone see. She sat near the stern, staring back at the blurred shoreline. Somewhere out there, battles still waited, inside and out. But for now, she allowed herself a single, silent breath of relief. And somewhere deep within her, the horizon shifted. No longer a place she feared, but a promise she was willing to face. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world still felt soaked, heavy clouds hanging low, the smell of wet earth clinging to every breath. The extraction boat hummed against the dock, its metal hull streaked with mud and river debris. Elena stepped off first, boots squelching in the saturated soil. Her legs felt heavier than they should. 5 hours to base, the pilot said quietly. His voice carried a weariness only soldiers knew. Enemy chatters picked up. They're not happy. She didn't respond. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, a pale smear of gray over distant hills. Something about that line of light reminded her of a childhood morning, before her father left for a deployment he never returned from. The memory cut deep, sharp and quiet. Dyer limped slightly, wincing as he climbed out behind her. "Think they'll hit us again before base?" "Assume they will," she said. Her voice was flat, but her chest tightened at the thought. She hated how familiar that dread had become. They loaded into an armored transport, its paint chipped, windshield cracked like a spider web. The engine rumbled to life. Inside, the air was stale, smelling faintly of oil and damp canvas. She sat near the back, cradling her rifle. Dyer leaned against the side, eyes half closed, murmuring his daughter's name again, Emma, like a talisman. As the convoy rumbled forward, the jungle receded, giving way to scrubland and wide stretches of mud. The wind through the bullet holes in the transport's side sang an odd, mournful tune. Elena let the sound wash over her. Half an hour in, a sharp crack split the air. The vehicle jolted, front left tire blown. The driver cursed, grinding the brake. Dust and steam rose around them. "Ambush," Dyer hissed, hand going for his rifle. "Too clean," she muttered. Her instincts screamed. Someone knew their exact route. They spilled out, weapons up. The silence was brutal. Even the birds had stopped. Then a single voice, distant, carried by the wind. "Vasquez." Her blood went cold. Nobody here should have known her name, not this far out. "Show yourself," she called, scanning the horizon. Nothing, just the wind and the hiss of cooling metal. Dyer's hand trembled slightly. What the hell was that? She didn't answer. She couldn't. That voice, it had sounded almost familiar, like an echo from a past she'd buried. They patched the tire quickly, every movement deliberate, every shadow suspect. Her mind spun. How deep was the leak? Who among their allies had betrayed them? When the transport lurched back onto the road, she sat rigid, pulse pounding. Dyer tried to lighten the air. "Hey, remember Khan's story about the goat that chased the commander through the village?" He grinned weakly. She managed a small breath of a laugh, but it felt hollow. The memory of that voice clung like smoke. Hours later, as dusk fell, they reached a forward outpost, a scatter of tents and sandbags under a sky streaked with dying light. The place felt too quiet, too temporary. Inside the command tent, maps were spread over a table. Captain Khan looked up from them, his face drawn. "You made it," he said, relief softening his tone for a heartbeat. Then, "But we've got a problem. Intel says the supply convoy we're supposed to escort tomorrow, it's already compromised. Someone's feeding coordinates to the other side." Elena's jaw tightened. "Someone here." Khan didn't deny it, he just looked tired. Later, she stood outside the tent, staring at the hills beyond. The sky had cleared, stars scattered across a velvet black. But instead of peace, the sight filled her with unease. She thought of her father again, how he'd whispered once after a long patrol, "Some horizons aren't meant to be crossed. Some are meant to be defended." She swallowed hard. Dyer joined her, silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "That voice calling your name, you knew it, didn't you?" She didn't look at him. "Maybe. You're not telling me something." She breathed out slow, "Not yet." A distant rumble of thunder rolled, though no storm was in sight. Somewhere, a wolf or maybe just a dog barked at nothing. The air smelled of dust and tension. Inside her, the horizon felt closer, sharper, like a blade waiting to be drawn. Tomorrow's mission loomed, and with it, the promise of answers she wasn't sure she wanted. For now, she stayed there in the cooling night, letting the silence press against her skin. Because silence, she knew, could be a warning, or a gift. And tonight, it felt like both. Why did she feel like the hills themselves were watching? The thought gnawed at Elena as the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in pale rose. The convoy's engines rumbled in the distance, their low growl vibrating through the cool ground beneath her boots. She tightened the strap on her pack, the rifle's familiar weight across her chest, a weight that had once comforted her, but now only reminded her of how far she had drifted from who she used to be. Dyer climbed onto the lead truck, flashing a tired grin. "Let's bring these supplies home, Captain." She nodded, but her stomach twisted. The hills were too still, the horizon too quiet. The vehicles began their crawl through the valley, tires crushing damp earth. Above, the sky widened, streaked with gold, but the light didn't ease the tension. Elena sat beside Khan in the second truck, her eyes scanning every ridge. Her pulse ticked like a metronome. Somewhere in this silence was the leak, the voice that had called her name. 2 hours in, the radio hissed, static, then nothing. Khan reached for the handset, frowned, tapped it. "Dead." "Comms are jammed," he muttered. Dyer's truck ahead slowed. Elena's gut sank. The valley narrowed, a perfect choke point. Then the world shattered. The first explosion tore through the morning, a bloom of fire and dirt that swallowed the lead truck. The shockwave punched the air from her lungs. Screams followed, ragged, human. "Ambush," Khan bellowed. Gunfire rained from the ridges, controlled, precise. Whoever was out there knew exactly where they'd be. Elena hit the ground, rolling behind a boulder, dirt gritting between her teeth. Bullets sparked off rock around her. She fired once, twice, but the attackers were ghosts, shadows flickering between stones. Dyer's voice cut through the chaos, hoarse with pain. "Captain, the driver's hit." She crawled forward, shoving a fresh magazine into her rifle. Smoke and dust curled like grasping hands. Through the haze, she saw Dyer dragging the injured driver out of the burning wreckage, his face streaked with blood and grit. Khan was shouting orders, trying to rally the few uninjured soldiers. The air reeked of cordite and burning diesel. Then she saw it, a single figure on the ridge, silhouetted against the sun. The same tilt of the head, the same stance that had haunted her since the riverbank. A shot cracked, a warning round close enough to whip her hair. "Elena," the voice carried clearly now, deliberate, intimate. "Stop running." Her chest constricted. That voice, low, gravelly, wasn't her father. It couldn't be. But it sounded like the man who had trained under him years ago, an ally who'd vanished on a mission gone wrong, a man they'd all presumed dead. She swallowed hard. Memories flooded back, him laughing with her father over cards, telling her as a teen, "A horizon isn't where the world ends, it's where you begin again." Betrayal burned her throat. Khan grabbed her shoulder. "We need a plan." But her mind was spinning. If he was alive, if he'd switched sides, then the leak was older, deeper than she'd feared. Gunfire intensified. The convoy was pinned. A young private, barely 20, froze, clutching his helmet. Elena crawled to him, gripping his wrist. "Breathe, look at me, you're okay." Her voice was calm, steady, her father's voice borrowed. The boy nodded shakily, pulled himself together. Little human moments like this, the fragile courage, they were why she still fought. She spotted an opening, a dry creek bed that wound toward a secondary ridge. "We flank left," she told Khan. "Take Dyer and whoever's standing. Suppression fire here. I'll draw their sniper." Khan's eyes searched hers, hesitant but trusting. "You sure?" "I need answers," she said quietly. She broke from cover in a crouch, bullets snapping overhead. She slid down the creek bed, mud soaking her knees. Her heart hammered, but there was a cold clarity in her veins. The ridge loomed, sharp rock and thorny brush. Above, the sun burned through the smoke, turning the world an eerie gold gray. Another shot clipped stone near her cheek, sending shards against her skin. She ignored the sting. She climbed, slow, deliberate, her rifle tight to her chest. Halfway up, a voice drifted down again, closer, almost gentle. "You don't have to do this, Vasquez." She froze. Her breath fogged in the cool morning air. "Why?" she called back, her voice low but cutting. "Why betray them?" A long silence. Then, "Because some battles aren't worth the cost they're demanding. You know that, you've felt it." She thought of the empty chair at her family's table, of the folded flag on the mantel. She thought of Dyer's whispered Emma, of Khan's weary eyes. "You chose this," she said, voice trembling with anger. "But I didn't choose to quit." Another shot cracked, not at her but past her shoulder, grazing a rock. A warning. She pressed her back to the stone, heartbeat roaring in her ears. And then a sound, distant but distinct. Her team returning fire, pushing the ambushers back. The tide was shifting. She exhaled, steadying herself. The man's silhouette flickered between rocks above, retreating now, like a shadow dissolving at dawn. But he wasn't gone, not yet. Elena climbed higher, scanning the ridge, finding only empty sky and wind-whipped grass. The ambush was breaking. Khan's shouts echoed below, rallying the convoy survivors. She stood there for a moment, high on the ridge, the horizon stretching endless before her. Her chest ached with something beyond exhaustion, a mix of rage, sorrow, and a quiet, dangerous resolve. Some battles were personal now, and she wasn't done. She slung her rifle, watching the enemy melt into the hills. The valley below was littered with smoke, broken metal, and men picking up the pieces. The horizon seemed to whisper again, not of land, but of battles yet to be fought inside. The outpost was quiet that night, too quiet. The sky stretched wide and black, dusted with indifferent stars. Elena stood alone near the perimeter wire, her shadow long against the pale floodlights. The valley below was still scarred from the ambush. Burned-out vehicles, craters now filling with rainwater, and the faint metallic scent of spent casings clinging to the air. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, fingers stiff from cold. Somewhere beyond those hills, the man who'd spoken her name had vanished like smoke. Somewhere out there, the truth about her father's final mission still waited, unspoken and unfinished. Dyer approached quietly, limping but upright. He held 2 tin mugs of bitter coffee. "Figured you wouldn't sleep." She accepted the cup. The steam rose between them, soft against the night. He sipped, grimaced. "Khan says command wants to reroute the supply lines. Pretend today didn't happen." His voice carried a tired anger. "Pretend good men didn't die." She stared at the horizon. They always pretend, until someone makes them look. A long silence stretched, filled only by the low hum of a generator and the occasional bark of a distant dog. Dyer shifted on his bad leg. "You're going after him, aren't you?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she remembered a memory she'd buried deep. Her father tucking her into bed, telling her a story about a sailor who chased a horizon he could never reach, not to find treasure but to keep a promise. That promise had lived quietly in her ever since. She placed her empty cup on a crate and shouldered her rifle. If he's alive, he knows something. And if he's willing to betray us, she trailed off. Words felt fragile in her mouth. Dyer's jaw tightened. "You don't have to do this alone." Her eyes softened for a moment. "I might." She turned and walked toward the command tent, boots whispering over gravel. Inside, the lantern light flickered over maps spread wide. Khan looked up, reading her face without needing words. He didn't try to stop her. He only nodded, an understanding that some fights aren't chosen but carried. Later, she sat alone in the darkened radio room. The equipment was silent, its green lights blinking steadily. She pulled a small photo from her pocket, a creased snapshot of her father standing on a cliff, wind in his hair, laughing. She touched the edge of the photo with a thumb, the way she had as a child, tracing a horizon she couldn't yet understand. The door creaked. A young private peeked in, Emma's age maybe. His voice was hesitant. "Captain, earlier when it got bad out there, I thought about running." She studied him, the vulnerability in his face. "But you didn't." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Because you didn't." She managed the faintest smile, small but genuine. "Courage isn't loud," she said quietly. "It's just a choice you make when no one's looking." He left, leaving her alone with the radio's steady blink and the distant wind. Outside, the hills were dark silhouettes against the starlight. Somewhere among them, an old friend turned ghost was waiting. Somewhere in those shadows was a truth too long hidden. Elena stood and stepped out into the night. She didn't feel heroic. She felt tired, human, and unwilling to let silence rewrite the story. She walked past the sleeping tents, past the wire, until she could see the whole valley spread beneath her, scarred, silent, and oddly beautiful in its own broken way. The breeze caught her hair. She let her shoulders drop just for a breath. In her gaze was a horizon, not of land, but of battles yet to be fought inside. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.